I'm Carola Suarez Orozco. I am the director of the Immigration Initiative, and I am welcoming with us today Dr. Fabienne Doucet, who is an associate professor at NYU in teaching and learning, and the director of the Metro Center at NYU as well. Fabienne, it's a delight to spend some time with you today. Thank you so much.
The pleasure is really mine. Thank you so much, Carola.
So, when did you know you would go into higher education, and what did you hope to accomplish at the time?
Sure. So I went to college at a small Christian school in central Pennsylvania. At the time it was Messiah College. It's now Messiah University. Mm-hmm. But I was, kind of in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania, and got a job. So my first job was vacuuming the cafeteria. Mm-hmm. My second job was cleaning bathrooms. Mm-hmm. And my third job was being a writing tutor. Uh-huh. And that was, which is exactly right. But this is the power of what teachers can do. Mm-hmm. So one of my teachers noticed that I was a good writer, mm-hmm. and said, we have a writing center and we're always looking for writing tutors, and you should, be a writing tutor. So I started there and loved that job. I loved that job. I loved helping my peers develop their writing, mm-hmm. and sort of really enjoyed the opportunity to sort of read what they were writing and that sort of thing. So it's like, I have to tell this story in kind of nuggets, because I feel like these things come to you in these little pieces, right? So it's sort of like, I recognize that I'm really enjoying this. I'm really loving sitting down with somebody and talking to them about their work and writing and helping them. And that's really great. After that job, or maybe even at the same time as that job, I had the opportunity to be a research assistant for one of my professors. Mm-hmm. And what that entailed was my professor had just finished his dissertation, and he was trying to write journal articles. At this time, I know nothing about this, right? Yeah, so I'm saying this to you like he's like, I wrote my dissertation. What's that?
What's a dissertation?
Exactly. I'm going to write some articles. What's that?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
But he explains to me that
he's acculturating you.
He's acculturating me. Absolutely. That's exactly right. Don Merck. Always in my heart. Mm-hmm. So he's acculturating me to what it means to be an academic without even my knowing it. And so I'm spending this time, this is in the 90s, so I'm going to the library, and I'm literally with these giant wooden carts piled with journals, pushing them through the different aisles to pick up the journals, mm-hmm. that, I'm supposed to be looking up, like who's writing about this topic that he's interested in, et cetera. And then, bring the cart into a private room and then start reading and taking notes to help him, mm-hmm. With his work. And my goodness, I was loving it. Mm-hmm. I loved everything about it. I loved the smell of the journals. I loved the smell of the library. I loved the carts. I loved the big journals. I loved all of it. Was really exciting and, interesting and so on. And at some point, I remember just kind of casually talking to some friends and saying something about how somebody should be a professor. Like one of my other friends, I was like, oh, you should be a professor. And then I was sort of like, or maybe I should be a professor. But again, it was one of those just like a fleeting thought, right? Fleeting moment. But then, so Messiah at the time had a relationship with Temple University, mm-hmm. where you could be a fully matriculated Messiah student and a fully matriculated Temple student at the same time. It was sort of like study abroad, except you're not abroad, you're in Philadelphia. 2 hours away.
Kind of abroad.
Depending on your grades. I mean, from Central PA, right?
Yeah.
From
Grantham. Relative.
Right, exactly. And so I was able to go to Temple. I went there for 2 semesters. I did the spring semester of my junior year and the fall semester of my senior year at Temple. And it was like a whole new world opened up to me, right? So at Messiah at the time, dancing was not permitted. I go to Temple, I'm in dance classes, right? For the first time in years of my life, right? That I've been a dancer my whole life, but I actually get to be a dancer, myself. And I'm taking all these classes. I'm taking a course on Black child development, a course on Black families. I'm taking a course on human sexuality and, working with this incredible sociologist and just sort of learning and having my mind kind of exploded, right? In this moment. And one of my classes was with the developmental psychologist, Diane Scott Jones. Oh. And I was in her intro, right? Developmental psych 101 type of course, 150 people, right? At least in this giant lecture hall. And I'm at the front, always the nerd. Ever the student, right? Yeah. Always at the front, always raising my hand, answering questions. And at the end of the semester, Dr. Scott Jones says to me, have you ever thought about going to graduate school? And I literally at the time was sort of like, what do you mean? Like, what does that even mean? Because I had this idea of like, maybe I would be a professor. That would be kind of cool, but I didn't know how you got there. I didn't know how that happened. And so she broke it down to me and she said, you're really good at this. Like you have a sharp mind. And I would like to invite you to come with me to Chicago to be my research assistant. I'm going to be conducting some interviews. She was at the time studying young mothers who were in high school. And she said, come with me. And this other doctoral student of hers, who was a doctoral student of hers. And we went to Chicago and I got for the first time in my life to conduct interviews. And again, was like a moment of revelation of like, this is really cool. This is
I can make
really, really
this.
cool. Right, exactly. Like this is a thing that people can do. And so that was that junior year, second semester of junior year. That summer was when I went to Chicago. And then I was hooked, right? Then it was sort of like, oh yes, I'm absolutely going to pursue this. I want to get a PhD. This is it. This is my career. This is what I want to do. And so I always sort of identify these folks as the people who really kind of helped to guide me along the way. And I also, another person that I always like to name in my story is Dr. Dorothy Gish. She was the dean at the time at Messiah, because my first year, I was going to be a pediatrician.
Interesting.
I started as a pre-med major, typical immigrant kid.
Yeah, of course.
Also, very typical.
Very typical.
Yes. At the same time, I was lucky enough that growing up the street from me, literally up the street, like, I don't know, 5 houses up on the other side, my pediatrician lived there and was an African-American woman, was a Black woman. So part of it was also wanting to be her, and she was beautiful and she was kind and she was smart. And she let me, when I was in high school, she let me shadow her one day at a clinic. And I was just sort of like, yay, like I want to do this, So I started out as pre-med major thinking like a pediatrician, you work with children. And I love children. I want to work with children.
Well, that's a common denominator.
There you go, right?
Yeah.
But then I sort of realized like, you have to go through all the science first. You have to take bio, and that was okay, but you have to take chemistry and you have to take organic chemistry. And that's when I realized like, oh, I have this all wrong. like I don't really understand that what it means to be a medical doctor is actually just being a scientist. And then working with children is sort of like if you choose that specialty, it's a thing that happens. It's not sort of like what gets you there. Loving kids is not enough to get you there. And so I had a bit of a crisis my freshman year. I was like, this is wrong for me. I don't know what to do, and I don't know what to major in. I don't know what I want to do. And Dr. Gish sat down with me and sort of listened and heard me talking about what I was interested in with it, which is children.
Right.
And she said, do you want to be a teacher? And I was like, no, I don't think I want to be a teacher. And so she said, people study child development. And I was like, what is that? Right. And so there again, somebody else who says, and she actually gave me, back in the day, when we were interested in colleges, we had to look through these tomes.
I remember.
Like phone books, right?
Yeah,
and each page had a set of things about the college and the majors and whatever. And so she actually encouraged me to explore. She said, like, look, read and learn. And then when I said to her, okay, Dr. Gish, yes, I want to study child development. She said, and I said, but we don't have that major here. She said, but we do have a major called behavioral science, and it is full of electives. And so she said, you're going to create your own major. And that's what I did. And that's actually how I ended up at Temple, was in order to create that one major. So these are people really who were just absolutely instrumental along my entire trajectory in continuing to propel me forward and socializing me to the next thing and the next thing. Because although I was not a first generation college student in the strict sense, meaning that my father is a physician, but he's in Spain, so I don't really know him and
contact with him.
Right. Really, 3 times in my life at that point, right, that I had had contact with him. And but I was also living in the house with my 2 cousins who were older than me, and they had gone to college, but they had done it pretty much on their own because they were, the first generation, at least, of U.S. college attendees, right? So, even though our families may have pursued higher education, some members of our family might have pursued higher education in Haiti or in other countries, in the US, they were really kind of the first. So I only had them to look to, and some other older cousins to look to as going to college, but none of them had gone to graduate school, right? So all of that was these mentors along the way who were sort of just kind of showing me little things and giving me little nuggets over time. And so that's how I ended up deciding, or that's how I landed in academia.
Beautiful. So you articulated it so well, just how important key people who see the light in a child or a student, who open windows when doors close, who spark curiosity along the way, how all those people along the way make such a difference in the journey, in a successful journey like yours.
Oh, I love what you just said about opening windows when doors close. That's exactly what Dr. Gish did.
Well, it sounded that way to me.
Oh my goodness, that's beautiful. And I know there are other people who have done that. Oh, I love that idea.
Well, I'm sure you do that all the time.
Oh, thank you.
Well, so you've done such a nice job of giving us a sense of how opportunities came along for you and how you took advantage of those in all the best sense of the word. Took advantage of those opportunities. Can you talk about, or do you want to talk about, or is this relevant? Were there obstacles in your way as you were thinking about higher education?
Yeah, of course.
Just wondering.
Wondering.
You might want to talk about that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I always tell my students, when, or even if I'm like going in front of an audience, and especially if it's an audience of like junior folks, or and they read the bio, and the bio, makes you sound like a rock star of some kind. And I'm always like, this is the highlight reel, people. We want to get down into the dirt and the mess and the ugly and
it's both and.
It's always,
it's
right?
Both and.
It always is, yeah. So in college, in addition, of course I had these professors who were wonderful and who really saw something in me, but I also had a professor who, one time I went to her after not being happy with my grade on a paper, and I said, what can I do to improve? Or maybe it was on an exam or something, whatever. And I said, what can I do to improve? And she said, well, you're a B student. She said, this is what,
writing you off.
Writing me off, like, you're a B student. This is as good as it's going to get for you. And I remember being shocked, right? Like absolutely shocked and speechless. And also like, oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, really?
Show you.
Exactly.
Well, that's a good reaction, actually.
I mean, so a lot of these kind of like the things that in high school, middle school and high school, those difficult experiences, being picked on, having, just kind of difficult conversations or encounters with teachers, those are actually things that propelled me forward because, I'm stubborn. And so if you tell me I can't do it, now I have to do it.
To put gas in your tank.
In some ways, right? It's sort of like, well, so I'm very fortunate in that way, that because so many kids,
it does the opposite.
It does the opposite. It really does the opposite. And I think it has to be balanced, right? And so I also think it's because probably the overwhelming voices were the ones that were saying, keep going, keep going, keep going. And the ones that were saying like, you're not really going to get very far, were few and far between. But certainly they were there because they're always there. I remember the first semester of college, having come from high school and getting really good grades and all that sort of stuff, and sort of like getting my first paper and getting like something like a 70 and just being like mouth on the floor, like, what are you talking about? And going to my professor and being like, what is this? What are you doing? I don't get bad grades. And he's like, oh, honey, he's sort of like, I get it. He's like, I'm sure you are smart, right? Like, of course you're smart. And he goes, but this, here are the things, this is how you write a paper. So wonderful teacher as well, right? Because he didn't say, this is as good as it's going to get.
He didn't write you off as
he did not.
D student. He said, okay, this is a game. This is how you're going to. This is how you can play the game.
Right, exactly.
Let me show you.
And
how.
Taught me how to improve. Right. This is how you improve. Right. This is what I'm looking for.
Right.
You thought you followed the instructions, but actually here's what this means, and here was what was missing, and all those kinds of things. So, so those like moments of sort of feeling defeated or feeling deflated. When I first started graduate school in my program, my mom, this is another story my mom loves to tell, is I called her one day in tears, like, Mom, I have to leave my program. Everybody's smarter than me.
Wow.
And, everybody's like brilliant, answering these amazing questions and doing so well in class. And I'm just, I'm so stupid. I don't know things. I don't know whatever. And she said, guess what? They are thinking the same thing about you.
Your mother's a wise woman.
She is a wise woman. So she was also such a big part of keeping me going, being a cheerleader, being encouraging. And my parents in Haiti, also encouraging, sending messages and all that kind of stuff. All of those things, I think, help to counterbalance those negative messages, because of course there are always failures and things that, like you go for a scholarship and you don't get it, or you apply to a program and you don't get in. I mean, like, all those things happened. Of course they did. Yeah.
So you underlined the importance of two sets of relationships, the relationships in terms of potential mentors along the way in the university setting that are explicit about, one, having faith in, expressing faith in your potentiality, and two, in articulating the rules of the game or the how the game's played, so that you have a chance to figure out how to do this yourself.
Absolutely.
And the other set of relationships are familiar relationships that support you along the way.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about what it was like when you first entered college. Did it align with what you expected?
It was pretty exciting to be living away from home for the first time. And I did have an older cousin at the same school. So I felt that was a little bit of a security blanket. In fact, that's why my mother made me go to that college, is because she wanted me to be, with a family member. That's such a typical Haitian thing, is like, we go where we have people, right? Well, maybe it's a typical immigrant thing.
I would say it's a typical immigrant
We go where we have people. We have somebody at that school, you're going to that school. So, in the beginning, it was like, just sort of the excitement of living away from home. But very quickly, living on, very predominantly white school, my roommate I had known since high school. So that was also a plus, because I already had kind of like a built-in ally and friend. She was white, but we went to the same church. And so we were close and we knew each other really well. But, the other girls on my floor, like when I would do my hair, which at the time I had a relaxer in my hair, and when I washed my hair, I had to roll it in these giant plastic rollers to make the hair stay straight. And it was like a show. Like the girls would come out of their rooms into the lounge where I'd be watching TV to see exactly. It was the first time that I had students ask me questions like, "Oh, you're from Haiti? Did you live in a box?" Not kidding. Those words. Did you live in a box? How did you come here? Did you come here on a boat? Which there are Haitians who come on boats, and there is nothing wrong with that. But to assume that was the experience, right? Having other students ask, did you live in a house? Like, all of these just outrageous, to me, outlandish, outrageous assumptions about what it meant to be Haitian, what it meant to be from Haiti. So when I was offended by these students, it wasn't that I was offended, right, in the sense of like, oh, I'm not like that. It wasn't that. It was just sort of like, is that all you think there is? Right? Like, there's a whole lot of other ways to be. And the fact that you only think of one experience, of one possibility for someone who comes from a particular country is just so naive and limited. And I think immigrant children, we're worldlier than kids who don't migrate. Even from, and I would say that's true probably from kids of every nation, including kids in Haiti. If you see other things, you know other things, and you have
at least two perspectives. At least probably more than that, but at least two perspectives you recognize is not just one way to be.
Right. So, now I think with the hindsight of adulthood, I can see that these were young people who just only had one, right, exactly, and just had one experience. But of course, at the time, it was really hurtful. There was a student who told me one time that, like, being in my physical presence was the closest she'd ever been to a Black person. And I was like shocked, sort of like, where are you from? Are you from like another planet, right? Like, how are you in this country and you've never been around Black people? But that was my naivete growing up in New Jersey, which is, relatively cosmopolitan, right? Going to church in New York City, and just kind of, it's a very different life than the student who was living, from some other part of the country where
she obviously had no exposure.
Right. She had no exposure whatsoever.
Felt no compunction about sharing this.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. So those early, like that first year of college was tough. And there was, luckily, thank God, a Black student union where I was able to find community, where there were other students of color. There was an international club. And even though I wasn't an international student in the strict sense, I understood those international students' experiences coming to the US for the first time, being here for the first time. So the International House was a place I loved to hang out, the Black Student Union, the Gospel Choir. Those were the places where I found community. But of course, there were also these, kind of other spaces that were more hostile, that felt unfriendly. And also I would say that even with that, even in the spaces that were friendly, I sort of felt different from everyone else because, I'm a 1.5 generation immigrant. I migrated at the age of 10. So I did not come here as an adult, as an 18-year-old, like the international students at my school. And I was not born here like the African-American or, say like Caribbean or African immigrant students who were, at my school in the ESU. I was sort of like this anomaly, this really kind of different experience. So I never quite felt like I really fit into a groove, like really perfectly, but I love people and
have great social skills.
Thank you. But so I found my way.
It sounds like you found two affinity groups, if you will, the international students and the Black student group, which were affinity groups that brought you a sense of community.
Yes.
Where you fit, but you weren't like a perfect fit. Right. You would like a rectangle going into a square or a square going into a rectangle. You kind of fit, but didn't quite fit.
Yes.
I mean, can you imagine an affinity group that would have been, like perfect fit? Yeah. If you were mistress of the universe, what would an affinity group for other students like you look like?
Well, actually, when I went to Temple, I discovered, of all things, a Haitian student union, which I was sort of like, how is this even real? Like, I was like, what? What a dream come true. I had no idea that there were enough Haitians, that there would be enough Haitians at any school, right, to actually have our own club. And so that was the space where I connected with other Haitian immigrants and Haitian Americans, like US born students. And, then it was like the square in the square. Then it was like, yes, this is it. This is where I really feel like people, they get me, they get my family, right? Like all the idiosyncrasies of being from a particular culture, of how your parents are and the things you're allowed to do and not allowed to do and all those kinds of things. Like they really got it. So that's actually why Haitian clubs were a part of my work that I carved out on the immigration project when I was doing my postdoc work. Was in these high schools where I was spending time, I saw the students being part of these clubs and remembered, right? Like
how important it was for you.
Right, like I get that experience. And so that's why it's one of the things that I've written about is sort of like the importance of ethnic clubs, basically, and using Haitian clubs as an illustration of how these can really be sort of liminal spaces, third spaces, home place for students.
Yeah, it's affinity groups are so important, and yet it's so contentious at this moment.
Oh, they really are.
When I hear people talk about it, you can see just how important it is. Then the question becomes like, how fine-grained do we cut up the affinity groups to be? But it underlines just how important it is.
Yes.
And I think stories like yours need to be told over and over again so that people keep investing in the importance of affinity groups. So can you share a little bit with us, when did you begin to imagine graduate school as an ambition, and what drew you to that pathway?
So that was definitely working with Dr. Scott Jones and understanding that in order to get a PhD, in order to become a professor, you have to have a PhD.
Yeah.
And then the
Step
way
one.
to get exactly. The way to get a PhD is to go to graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was the one who sort of oriented me to how to apply to graduate school. And then she had that graduate student that I had gone to
Mm-hmm.
Chicago with. And so she also was sort of, telling me like, this is how you find schools.
Mm-hmm.
Again, looking through those giant, books. And this is how you kind of decide. And for me, it was like, I knew that I wanted to live in the South because I wanted to be somewhere warm. And that was sort of like my main criterion. So I applied to schools, and I ended up going to graduate school at UNC Greensboro because I wanted to major in human development and family studies, which was, at the end of the day, that was the crafted major.
Right.
And so I applied to these sort of land grant institutions where they have human development and family studies as a field, which is not a field that you find in other schools at the time. Now I would say there are more schools that have that, but certainly then really the land grants were the only ones that had what we call HDFS.
Mm-hmm.
And so I applied to, Greensboro, applied to a school in Georgia, applied to a school in Virginia, a school in Florida, and ultimately decided that UNCG was the place that I just felt the most like fit, just like the click of the feeling that you get where you're like, yeah, this is it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was the place where I got the this is it feeling. And so that's how I ended up, in my graduate program.
So you get to your graduate program.
Mm-hmm.
What was that experience like, and how did it align with your expectations?
Mm-hmm. So aside from the moment of feeling, the call to my mom saying everybody's smarter than me, it really was actually amazing.
Mm-hmm.
My graduate school experience, I would say, was just so rich intellectually. I got to take these classes and really study in depth, these theories and learning about research and conducting research. And I had wonderful mentors, and I loved graduate school. Mm-hmm. Probably out of the different schooling times, I can definitely obviously pull out moments and highlights of, goodness in all of them, and even in college. But in graduate school, I think like that's when I really found my groove, right?
Mm-hmm.
I found my fellow nerds. I found my fellow people who like just want to read all the time and study all the time and talk about Bronfenbrenner and other theorists and, talk about Derrida and whatever. Frantz Fanon, that's like this is my crowd, right? These are my people. And so graduate school was really fantastic. And I would say for the most part, pretty seamless in terms of like no moments of, should you really be here from other people? Yeah,
from other people.
Right.
Okay.
I had my self-doubts, but from other people,
Mm-hmm.
like the way that things had happened in earlier years. In graduate school, there was just really none of that. It was like everybody was taken very seriously, right? Like you're here, we've accepted you into this program, we believe in you, work. Mm-hmm. And then we're like, absolutely, like I'm happy to, right? That's why I'm here. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, it was really wonderful from that point on. I would say graduate school was really a great time in terms of just the intellectual community. Mm-hmm. Greensboro was different in that there wasn't like a Haitian American community of peers. I actually did work with an organization that was supporting refugee families. And so at one point I became like the family friend. It was like through this particular program, and you could be like a friend to the family. So I was a family friend to a Haitian family. And so I would love to go hang out over there and eat, and those kinds of things, and spend time with the kids who were younger than me. But that felt like that was really just lovely and a nice connection. But I think probably because of over the years of being used to being in predominantly white spaces, or being in spaces where I was kind of like different, it really in grad school, like in my grad school classes, that didn't feel the same way. It didn't have the same texture of not belongingness. It was sort of like just a very different experience. And I think probably developmentally, my needs were different at that time.
And you were ready for it.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
I mean, I think once you're an immigrant, you're always a little bit you fit everywhere, but you don't fit anywhere.
Yeah,
It's just like, that's the way it is.
Exactly.
And it takes a while to get used to that space.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then developmentally, you were ready for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
And you're not expressing the discomfort that many people have in graduate school. But, you know, a lot of people don't have positive memories of their graduate experience.
Right.
I mean, it's rather unusual that people say, oh, yeah, grad school is great.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I mean, I feel...
It's you know, and I have my usual question. So what were the challenges you encountered? It sound like you had a ton of them.
The challenges, I think, were probably typical challenges in the sense of, like, you know, making deadlines and having, you know, just like writing is hard. And I had to, like, I remember for my doctoral program comp exam, I like went and lived in my friend's basement so that I could just like be away, and, you know, just kind of go away and be like isolated and work. So, you know, the loneliness, the sort of like the challenges of just pushing yourself and, you know, working on a dissertation and pushing yourself. And I mean, I had moments like at my dissertation defense, I remember being upset with one of my committee members because they asked me a question that I felt like I had already answered. Like, it's little things, you know what I mean? It's like these little things, but there was no time really where I felt like anybody was against me or, you know, I did have a difficult transition. Actually, so when I first started grad school, I went to UNCG partly because of the kind of feeling, you know, this is it, but also because of the person that I was working with. Because typically when you choose a graduate program, you want to be somebody's mentor or mentee, excuse me. So I had chosen my advisor and I wanted to be her mentee. And at the time I thought that what I wanted to study was Black families, and I wanted to study attitudes and ideas around discipline in Black families. And this person was doing that work. And so I was like, okay, great, I'm going to go and study with her. And toward the end of my first year, she told me that she was leaving. And I was challenged. I was like, didn't even know that was a thing, right? Like, you're allowed to do that, you know? Like,
abandon me.
Exactly. Like, I just got here. Like, what do you mean you're literally abandoning me? And, you know, so that was another moment of like, what am I going to do now? And really not being sure what I was going to do. And I found another advisor, the wonderful John Tudge, who is, you know, to this day, we write each other letters. And so he ended up being the right fit. As far as, so the way that it was done, I got a fellowship essentially, but your fellowship, you did work with a professor, and it wasn't assumed that that professor was necessarily going to be your PhD advisor. So you worked for them as an RA, learning the skills of becoming a researcher, but not necessarily sort of cornering you into that work. So the second year, because John didn't come back until, so the way that program is structured, it's a 5-year program, MS PhD. And so the first 2 years you're getting your master's degree, and then the last 3 years you're getting your PhD. But it's all kind of, you know, it's framed or set up as a seamless kind of program. So my first 2 years, John wasn't there. So the second year, I was working with this other professor doing stuff that was like literally no interest whatsoever, but still learning the skills of how to do research. So I was doing that, and you know, was really kind of starting to be like, am I going to be able to stay here? Like, if this is the kind of work that people are doing and I'm not really interested, what am I going to do? So when John came and he was doing this, you know, project that was a multinational study of young children and how they learn to become members of their society. So
that begins to resonate.
So that begins to resonate, right? And at this point, I'm just an RA on his project, right? I haven't committed anything, and he's not asking me to commit anything. But my project, or you know, the work is to collect data by following children around. So he had already done this at this point in Russia, Estonia, Finland, Kenya, and I maybe that's it at that point. Maybe Korea at that point, but maybe not. And so I was doing the African American families in Greensboro. And so what we do is what we did for this project was children would be set up with a little mic. We'd put a little mic on them in a pouch. And we would be following them and just kind of hanging out in their environment. So it's sort of like ethnography, but not fully ethnography, because you're the observational protocol was kind of structured. It was a semi-structured protocol. So it wasn't just a complete kind of immersion, but it gave me a taste for that. And I loved that. And that was really, really fun. And being with John and working on these papers and hearing and learning about the work that other graduate students who were in other parts of the world were doing and where they were collecting data, and kind of that was like very resonant. And John himself actually is an immigrant. He's from England, from the UK. And so there was also, I think there's just something about like the immigrant experience where we get each other, even if we're not from different places, even if
doesn't matter where you're from, right? Background. It's like it's the immigrant experience.
There's something
common denominator
that just gives you, this sense of like, like you get me and I get you. Yeah, exactly. I'd never thought about that before, but it's.
I think about that all the time. Actually.
I mean, specifically with John, like I'd never thought about the fact that like, oh yeah, John was an immigrant. Maybe that's why we got along so well, still get on so well. But I think just having that experience with those kids and like following those kids around, I really fell in love with that, and I ended up doing my master's thesis on the children. But then during the project, we were also interviewing parents. That was one of the components of the study, and I became really fascinated with the parents and hearing their perspectives. And then I was also spending time in schools. I was volunteering. In addition to working with the Haitian family, I also had a Hmong family. And I was also working in a school where I was like tutoring or just working with Hmong children. And so in schools, I was spending time in schools in Greensboro and just kind of like noticing things. And so I remember one of the things that I noticed, and I picked it up, was this brochure. And it was about kids being ready for kindergarten. And it was like, is your child ready for kindergarten? It was like, on the cover, something like that. And then when you open it, it's all about like the things that you need to do to get your kids ready for kindergarten. And I literally said to myself, but is the school ready for the kids? Like I was sort of like
flipping the question.
Yeah, I was sort of like, this brochure is so one-sided. Like what happened to the other side? And so I ended up doing my dissertation with the families of the children that I had done the other work with, because those kids were about to transition into kindergarten. And so I wanted to know about what are these families thinking about what it takes for a child to be ready. And, at the time, right, it's sort of like, where are the areas of alignment and misalignment between what the school system believes that children need to be ready for school and what these parents believe that children need to be ready for school? Where are the points of connection, but also like, and I think then as my work has developed over time and working on issues of parent engagement and family involvement in schools, parent involvement in schools, it's always been for me about how can I bring the message of parents, immigrant parents, parents of color, to the schools to say, here are the things that maybe you're missing. Here are the things that maybe you're not seeing, that these people who have wisdom and who have, a lot to bring to the table, here are some things that you might want to learn from them. And so that was kind of where that thread started. And I've continued to follow that thread. And I'm still, really fascinated by it, because I think even now, right, I've been in my career for over 20 years and some of the same issues are still, still here.
And that will bring me to the next question. In what ways has your immigrant experience informed your research and career goals?
Very deeply, very deeply.
Can you share?
Absolutely. So this is the part where I get to brag about you. So in graduate school, I was going through my coursework, having a wonderful time working with the families, and all of that was great. But I took this anthropology class, and our final assignment was to study a new field, or like a new scene, kind of in that language of anthropology. And I was, not sure what to do. And so I think I might have met with my professor to say, like, I'm not sure what to pick and whatever. And he was like, a lot of times, like, we learn a lot by studying our own experience, right? So, and so I was like, I'm really fascinated by Haitian immigrants. And I had friends who were born in the US who were Haitian, like my very best friend that I met on the first day of 6th grade, and other kids who had really different experiences from me, who came as a child, and so I was sort of like, I'm really interested in kind of comparing Haitians that are born in Haiti and Haitians that migrate, to the US, like as children, and what those experiences are. And so that was what I wrote my final project on. I mean, there wasn't much. There wasn't much research at the time. It was part of the problem, right? It was, trying to find the research to begin with. But actually, I do believe that is how I found out about the Harvard Immigration Project, about the Lisa study. Was I was sort of trying to find research on who was studying Haitian immigrants. And at the time, there were just very few scholars who even had Haitian immigrants in their samples. But here, this project at Harvard is happening, and they are studying 5 different immigrant groups, and one of them is Haitians. And I'm sort of like, you've got to be I need to find, I need to work with these people. This is, I've got to figure this out. And so I was at the time, applying for postdocs and applying for jobs, and reached out to you and Marcelo cold, just I'm a graduate student and I'm, whatever, and I'm Haitian and I'm interested. And you all were like, absolutely, please come and meet us. And, I remember coming and meeting with the two of you, first of all, being deer in the headlights that, I'm at this prestigious institution and I'm going to meet with these incredible scholars. And the two of you were just the most down-to-earth, kind, easygoing, really just chatty and wanting to hear stories and so forth. And it was really just such a incredible moment of feeling recognized and welcomed. And when I said, I want to do this postdoc in this particular application with the National Science Foundation, there's this minority postdoctoral fellowship, but you have to have a mentor, and you have to write your application with your mentor. And you were like, absolutely write it. We'd love to have you, do your project with us. So we joined the immigration projects, and also, so that you all were studying the 1.5, and I was interested in the second generation as well. So my my proposal was about sort of I'm going to be part of this project, studying the 1.5 generation, and I'm going to carve out, and get a sample of second generation students to, do this exactly, to do a comparative study. And so that was very much, right, then connected to my own experience, was wanting to get deeper into the immigrant experience. And then the thread of families came back around, both from that dissertation work with families, being really fascinated with that. And then, of course, parent interviews were also part of the study design for Lisa. So, those conversations with Haitian parents was sort of reminding me of the conversations with the African-American parents and my mom, and how my mom, didn't really understand the American school system. And so the questions that I would be getting from Haitian parents when I would be in their homes to do interviews or to, hang out with their student or child or whatever, was that recognition of there's a lot here. There's a lot of, what we would call capital, social capital, that these families don't have by way of information. And so they saw me as someone who, from this prestigious institution, Harvard, that this person can actually probably help my child and, give us information. And so that was, kind of that full circle kind of moment situation where you realize that all of the experiences along the way, kind of build in small pieces towards something. And then in the postdoc fellowship, it sort of felt like this is A, not B, but sort of a culmination or some kind of landing place of, look at all these things that have come together and now you're here. And then I, of course, over the 20 years that have been since, it's been sort of an ongoing development and continuing to explore the same work of immigrant families and family school relationships. But then because I, when I came to NYU, joined a Department of Teaching and Learning, being fascinated with what teachers were learning about children, immigrant families.
Or not learning.
Exactly. And then bringing that into my research as well, making that link for educators of, here are the things that you should know about these students in your classroom and the families that they come with.
So it sounds like several things strike me. One is that the thread of your own life experience informed or sparked an interest in the immigrant experience, the Haitian immigrant experience. Another thing that strikes me is how entrepreneurial you were. I mean, just, you know, the cold calling is not something that everybody has the chutzpah to do, and or you know, has the self-confidence or dares to do, right? And you did it, and you know, not every risk pans out, but in your case it did.
Yes.
And you know, I'll say that on our side, we were doing work with immigrants from various groups, and we have a lot, you know, we felt we knew something about the Mexican experience, the Central American experience. Haitian immigrants, you know, there was nothing written, and we're not Haitian, you know, so we really felt like we needed to partner with someone who could, you know, co-advise us. So it was a win-win for us as well. Great. So, you know, I just want to say that, you know, one, you were entrepreneurial, and two, you know, if you meet the right people, it can work. It's both. All sides can gain from that experience, and then you continued that thread through the rest of your work.